From the golden text and the responsive reading, these are the two ideas from Mrs. Eddy that have come to me through the week thus far. From the responsive reading, there's the great thrust of our demonstration of the love that is God in the love that we express. And I keep thinking of, that nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. And somewhere in the lesson it also mentions, don't get involved in hecatombs of gushing theories, stereotyped and borrowed speeches, but the meekness of love, the sacrifice of love. And what I highlighted in my thought from the responsive reading was Mrs. Eddy's spiritual interpretation of the Lord's Prayer. Enable us to know, as in heaven, so on earth, God is omnipotent, supreme, and He is the alone God. She uses that, or I think it's in this lesson, the alone God, the one God. But she says it as the alone God, and I like that very much. It's a fresh way of looking at it. Okay. The alone God is love. Now let's see. The next thing that I highlighted was that wonderful expression, behold, I send an angel before thee to keep thee in the way and to bring thee into the place which I have prepared. And spiritually, in section 2, that is that wonderful statement from Mrs. Eddy that gives us such assurance of love. Love inspires, illumines, designates, and leads the way. Right motives give pinions to thought and strength and freedom to speech and action. I think that's so helpful. I know in my personal life, and my thinking about all the college graduates who are attempting to get jobs now, including my grandson, and my seeing them, not giving them hecatombs of gushing theories, but know that love is inspiring, illuminating, designating, and leads the way that will lead them to joy, to service to God, to spiritualization ultimately of their very existence, to their recognition of it. Spirit God, in that same vein, gathers unformed thoughts into their proper channels and unfolds these thoughts even as He opens the petals of a holy purpose in order that the purpose may appear. And I think it's terribly important for me, I know, to pray about education and about the direction of young people into the right expression of their being. And I thought that this section on love certainly had that as a strong basis, combined with the wonderful divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. No matter what they're saying about cutting funds, etc., love will care for the human condition as well as the understood spiritual relationship. And we have two interesting stories, and I have a third one from Vespers. We have the digging of the wells by Isaac. Isaac, in Bible study, is somewhat put down as not a very worthily expressive love of God and of being the chosen one. But I think that this story with Abimelech, where he does not fight, but he continues to persist in digging of the wells until his persistence and his love of peace and his prosperity bring Abimelech and his men to recognize the nature of his God. Okay. In that same section, which is section 3, I love so much the marginal notes. Clad in the panoply of love, human hatred cannot reach you, has the marginal note of the armor of divinity. I had never noticed that before. But we're not fighting the way the Israelites fought when they came into the land that had been given to them, and that they seemed to prepare to fight again for that land. It's not fighting that triumphed here. It was recognition. There's another marginal note in the same section. True government of man. And I think this whole lesson opens up to us need for prayer, for government, for the recognition that fighting is not what's necessary to establish one's rights to land, but rather Isaac's turning aside from fighting, digging more wells, giving them up, digging more wells, giving them up, and must have its perfect work. And it did with Isaac. That wonderful expression, clad in the panoply of love, human hatred cannot reach you, is one of my favorites also. Let's see what we have here. Next, I had a wonderful experience from the Vespers on Sunday. We had a young man who first was an upholsterer, and then after 10 years of upholstering went into the divinity school and gave a very, very well-designed and thoughtful lesson to us. And it fits right under the story of Isaac finding the right place, and later on, let's see, there's another one in here. Well, anyway, he talked about Matthew 4, which is the imprisoning of John the Baptist. And he said that after that, and it's in fact true because I looked up Matthew 4 and read the whole chapter, that Jesus fled, as it were, or left the area and went to the Sea of Galilee, to Capernaum. And I'm sure there gave himself over to ardent prayer as to whether this was the time for him to do his mission. He was probably in great danger, but I think it was more, what is my next step, God? And that's when he saw the fishermen who were to become his disciples. And I always loved that scene because they left their nets and they went immediately and followed him. But the way the way the minister described the scene was so much more enlightening. He talked about how the nets are untangled and made ready by being thrown up into the air and spread out, encompassing 20 feet or more, with weights on the end. that then would come down from above, from their having hurled them up, to untangle them and bring them down to the sea, and ultimately when they got fish in them, to secure them in one big wrapping and bring the net in filled with fish as one, the result of the whole fishing experience of the day. And I just thought that scene of throwing it up into the air to clear out all the entanglements, and I thought that was what was going to be loosed from these men, their entanglement with the material sense of life, and then having it all bound up in one. And that alone God came to me in thought too. I found it just a very inspiring scene, and very appropriate under the topic of love as the principle. The alone God. Okay. Let's see what else I wanted to highlight. The outstretched arms. Let's see, we're in, I don't know what section when it's number 20. The benign thought of Jesus finding utterance in such words as take no thought for your life would heal the sick and so enable them to rise above the supposed necessity for physical thought-taking and doctoring. But if the unselfish affections be lacking, and common sense and common humanity are disregarded, what mental quality remains with which to evoke healing from the outstretched arm of righteousness? I just love that expression, the outstretched arm of righteousness, going to us, to lead us and to bring us in the way that the Lord God has certainly prepared for us. All right. I think that's all I wanted to say from those sections. What stood out to me, as it never has before, was in citation 21. If we would open their prison doors for the sick, you must first learn to bind up the broken-hearted. This is part of her saying, no hecatombs of gushing theories, please. If we would heal by the Spirit, we must not hide the talent of spiritual healing under the napkin of its form. And she begins to use those things, those accoutrements of burial and death, under the napkin of its form. When the corpse was put into the sepulcher, was wrapped, and there was the whole body was wrapped in linens, and then there was a napkin put over the face. So that is a terminology for death. Bury the morale of Christian Science in the grave clothes of its letter. There it is again. The imagery of death, which is going to be what we have unless it is the tender word and Christian encouragement of an invalid, and some patience with his fears, and the removal of them are better than hecatombs of gushing theories. So we are certainly directed how to love in this lesson. We're directed to know the nature of God as love, but then how we are to demonstrate that nature. And ye know, this is citation 20, in all your hearts and in all your souls, that not one thing hath failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spake concerning you. All are come to pass unto you, and not one thing hath failed thereof. This is a very important passage that I just was not as aware of as I should have. But in so many of the articles in the periodicals, both the Journal and the Sentinel this past year, there's been the handling of depression and some suggestions that it lies in ruminating over the past and over failures. And that depression is ingratitude. So that if we do begin to ruminate, let us ruminate upon all that the Lord your God has done for you. He is the one in charge. That the Lord your God spake concerning you, all the good things. All are come to pass unto you, and not one thing hath failed thereof, if you are looking at it spiritually. Spiritual sense is a conscious, constant capacity to understand God, which is good, not failure, etc. So that gives me an awful lot to think about. Yes. Then I picked up one of the anthologies of classic articles. I think it's number 1. And it is no, it's number 2. It is an article written by Ivamiga Walter, L. Ivamiga Walter. And it's on page 62, and it's one of her finest. She has a wonderful, wonderful sense of unfolding the meanings of Mrs. Eddy's spiritual directives, etc. And this is called Love, What a Word. Love's colon, what a word, and that's in quotes because it comes from Mrs. Eddy. In her miscellaneous writings, it begins under the caption Love. Mary Baker Eddy says, what a word. I am in awe before it. Over what worlds on worlds it hath range and is sovereign. The underived, the incomparable, the infinite all of good. The alone God is love. And it's page 249 to 250. And I will just read one or two little passages to whet your appetite to read the whole thing, because it just lifts you the way those nets were lifted up to the sunshine, all the entanglements taken out of them, taken out of our lives, and recognition of God, the only one, the all one. Love derives from nothing but itself. It enfolds its object within itself as its own immediate evidence. She says elsewhere, you don't have God and then a lot of little reflections of him circulating around him. It is rather that we are all within the expression of love. We are the expression of love. There is no passive good, no stagnant love. Love is life, it is action, vitality, power, something to be felt and lived, not merely talked. Okay. How desperately the world needs to understand love as principle, not by starting with the belief of many races and trying to amalgamate these in equality one. Love does not start with many and make these one. Love starts with one and expresses itself in one harmonious whole, one infinite, indivisible self-expression. I think that the world now is trying to take a lot of little parts and make them into one, to have unity and not war. And what we have to do is pray to see that it's all the parts are already spiritual and one with the infinite, indivisible self-expression. In this one there is neither superiority nor inferiority, for love reflects its own perfection and excellence in endless variety of form, outline, and color. Thus it is that Christian Science, demonstrating love as principle, alone holds the answer to the world's problems. So, and it goes on with uplifting interpretations of Mrs. Eddy's work on God as love principle. Science can only be grasped on the basis of the one ego, not one ego surrounded by billions of little egos that reflect it, but one ego reflecting itself in countless spiritual forms and forever remaining one ego. So that is really a highlight of a wonderful lesson. I mean, you can just reread it and reread it and reread it. And I tried to show what I have taken from it that needs prayer, that's been brought up in the stories and in the lesson. And I think in the story of Jesus going to Capernaum, I think it not only do his disciples, there are 4 of them that follow him at his command, 4 so-called fishermen. But also directly thereafter, he goes on a mission and he heals for the first time in Matthew a leper with an outstretched arm touching him. So I think it was just a wonderful little light put on the lesson by this pastor. And I thought I'd share it with you. Okay, that's all I have to say, because I think the lesson is so clear. Oh boy.